On this edition of Independent Sources, still struggling. Far Rockaway residents fighting to find their footing 3 years after Superstorm Sandy. And Book of Magic, a mystical mural takes a little girl on a journey of a lifetime. Those stories and more coming up on Independent Sources. Welcome to Independent Sources, bringing you news from New York's ethnic and immigrant communities. I'm Abi Ishola. 3 years after Superstorm Sandy, residents of Far Rockaway are still displaced and suffering from physical and financial woes. The storm was the largest to hit the U.S.'s northeast coast in the last 40 years. It devastated the city with its hurricane-force winds, flooding subways and washing away vehicles and homes. It hit the Rockaways particularly hard. The city has spent over $140 million just to restore the boardwalk and some buildings on the beach. But there are some who argue that that's still not enough. I sat down with Juan Camilo Osorio of the NYC Environmental Justice Alliance and Marcia Forbes-Bennett, a Sandy survivor and member of Faith in New York. We talked about Sandy's environmental impact and those still struggling after the storm. Juan Camilo and Marcia, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having us.
So Juan, I'll start with you. It's 3 years after Sandy, and there have been reports that people have health issues and psychological issues from the storm. Can you talk a bit about that?
Sure. What we know after Sandy is that out of the total number of facilities, hundreds of facilities that are regulated, required to report their use of substances, 18 of them actually reported spills after the storm.
Wow.
However, what we know is that that the city really released very little in terms of what was exposed, how much was exposed, and how dangerous those exposures were.
Have you worked with any of the community members and who have been affected by this spill?
So we have, as a matter of fact, our members located in Sunset Park, located in the South Bronx and North Brooklyn, have been working directly with us in trying to understand what happened after the storm. But it's very little, there's very little public information really on what happened. The city's official report developed after Sandy, which basically created the framework for recovery and resiliency building in the region. The Special Initiative for Rebuilding and Resiliency's report documented that, unfortunately, out of those spills, half of them were already cleaned up by private parties when the city did its inspection, and the rest of them literally were washed out by the storm. What we know, however, is that these substances are very dangerous, and that industrial neighborhoods, are really at a stake. I mean, we also know that local industrial businesses are a critical source of employment for these neighborhoods. Yeah. But industry shouldn't kill you. And so one of the things that we've been doing and working directly with the member organizations in these communities, who again have been working for decades in terms of how to build a more sustainable and resilient waterfront, is to actually understand what are the best practices that are out there to work with the businesses to understand how to protect the health and safety of both the workers and the residents, and what are some of the technical and financial resources required to actually help them. On the Twin Track, we've also been partnering with the RAND Corporation and the Lifeline Group and other groups of scientists to actually do additional research and understand exactly what is the likelihood of these exposures to happen. Okay. And one of the things that we found is that it doesn't require a lot of resources to actually make a difference. When, for example, in the case of recovery workers, just having the right boots or using a respiratory mask in the right way can have a big impact towards reducing that risk.
Wow. So Marcia, just to bring you into the conversation, you're a survivor of Sandy.
Correct.
So how has the storm affected you 3 years later, even to this day?
3 years later to this day, we're still displaced. Immediately after Sandy, we had to move out of our home, and thereafter we had it repaired and we moved back in. And then we were told that we had to elevate. So we are now back out. So it has been very difficult for us because we've had many ups and downs, dealing with the contractors, dealing with Build It Back. It's not easy. It's a lot of paperwork, it's time consuming, and many of the homeowners are working class people. So it's very difficult for us. I have 2 children at the time of Sandy. One was in high school, one was in college, and the transportation back and forth for them, we were living in a hotel in the city immediately after for very many months. And it was just difficult. I work in the city, so it was not too bad for me, the getting to and from work. But for them, it was hard, so we were in many locations. And being back home, it was very good, but now being out of our home, it's a burden.
Yeah.
We've had to now rent an apartment, and so we're paying rent and mortgage.
Wow.
So, it's hard.
Wow. You're a member of Faith in New York.
Yes, I'm a member of the Faith in New York. Well, I am with a member of St. Mary's Star of the Sea and St. Gertrude Roman Catholic Church and the Faith in New York family. Faith in New York came to our congregation and informed us about mold immediately after Sandy. This is how I became involved, because I am very concerned about the health issues. And so they told us that we had to, get rid of mold, get rid of our flooring, get rid of our walls before mold set in. That we did, and that was good. Now we are concerned about the material that Build It Back is using. The city programs have been good because they've helped us tremendously.
Yeah.
Because immediately after Sandy, the federal government came in the form of FEMA to give emergency services, and that's how we got into the hotel. Thereafter, they under the Mayor Bloomberg, they instituted the rapid repairs, and that program helped us to get boilers and water heaters and to get us back on track.
Okay.
I had flood insurance, so I was able to repair my home. I also had to go into my children's education funds. I also had to do withdrawals against my retirement income, and that has posed also a problem because now we have to be paying back the IRS and the state, on the penalties and interest. So it's just a difficult process. It's just a difficult process. But I count myself fortunate because the Build It Back came and we have been elevated. Many people in the community or communities, not only Far Rockaway, but other communities, are still waiting 3 years later to get back into their homes.
Wow.
I have been in and I'm out, but many of them have not gone back into their homes as yet. So I'm sure there are lots of people who are even more burdened than I am. I count myself lucky.
Wow.
I'm very fortunate.
Wow.
And I do appreciate the city putting into place these programs to assist us.
Juan Camilo, there have been reports that there are a lot of businesses in the area that are being built back up, and they're calling it like the early version of Williamsburg. So there are a few people that are trying to rebuild. Would you say that there are people that have figured it out, or?
Well, listen, the reality is that we're at a really critical tipping point in New York City. I mean, the mayor earlier this year released a blueprint that for the first time really connects building a sustainable city with building a resilient city together. The Bloomberg administration had been looking at these goals separately. And not only that the Blasio administration brings them together, but also frames them highlighting the importance to achieve equity Because as Marcia was pointing out, adapting to climate change and vulnerability to climate change impacts is not the same across the board. The reality is that low-income communities, communities of color, communities like industrial waterfront neighborhoods, environmental justice areas, where there has been a disproportionate environmental history, are more vulnerable to climate change impacts, which will only exacerbate this. On the other end of the spectrum, the administration has put forth a very aggressive and very important affordable housing agenda that has been mainly focused on achieving a 200,000 goal of new and preserving and building new affordable housing units. And the reality is that a lot of these communities, industrial waterfront neighborhoods, and the local businesses that work there are constantly pressured by real estate tensions, land speculation, etc. So while they were hit by Sandy, some of them taking advantage of some of the existing resources were able to bounce forward, not back, but forward, because New York City's industrial sector is a really important a sector for the future of New York City, for the future of low-income and working-class New Yorkers, but at the same time are being threatened by potential infrastructure improvements, coming from One NYC and the city's efforts to fully recover the region and build resiliency that can eventually result in forced displacement of the people that work and live there. You mentioned North Brooklyn. And North Brooklyn is, an example of a community that, even though fought very hard to maintain community character and maintain affordable housing and developed a series of really important plans, community-based plans to get there, has been extensively gentrified. And gentrified, by commercial and residential uses that have been negatively affecting the core industrial areas. A lot of the jobs that were located there are have gone and probably will never come back. So what's going to happen with the New Yorkers that depend on those jobs to be able to live here? UPROS, one of our member organizations in Sunset Park, the Point Community Development Corporation in the South Bronx, El Puente in North Brooklyn, are examples of community-based organizations that have been fighting environmental justice, that have been documenting and addressing potential public health impacts, like what Marcia was talking about, and that are currently facing this really important conversation, which is, okay, just last week, the mayor released a critically important, a little long due, but critically important industrial policy agenda, a 10-point agenda that, not for nothing, sends a really strong message in terms of the type of supports, the type of support that industrial businesses in industrial areas require, but didn't address how are we going to protect those businesses for future climate change impacts, or how are we going to position them, just to wrap up, how are we going to position New York City's industrial businesses and New York City's workforce to provide the services and the goods that the climate adaptation economy, not just of New York City, but of the entire region, will require. How are we positioning
putting any pressure on the city to answer those questions?
Yes, well, I mean, the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance and some of our members have been articulating specific campaigns with policy recommendations to inform this process. UPROS is an example that has been leading a local campaign to address this problematic as it affects Sunset Park. And the same has been happening in the South Bronx with the Point Community Development Corporation, which each of these groups have been very creatively connecting how to recover, how to build community resiliency, how to engage local industrial businesses and local residents in the process of both planning for these infrastructure projects, but also in terms of the types of jobs that could be generated or should actually be generated, local hiring requirements, labor standards, etc., that can guarantee that while we invest billions of dollars in the recovery of the region, we're also improving local economic conditions, social conditions, and public health.
Okay. Juan, Camilo, and Marcia, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Still to come on the show, a magical mural takes a young woman on a wonderful journey. Before that, Crystal Lowe has some other news.
Thanks, Abby. Here's a look at some headlines from New York's ethnic and community media. From El Diario La Prensa, some Latino small businesses are concerned that they may have to cut hours and positions in light of the increase in New York State's minimum wage. While employees stand to benefit from the proposed increase of the living wage to $15, small business owners say that the increase may severely impact the sustainability of small and independent businesses. The New York Farm Bureau and a number of other organizations representing small businesses traveled to Albany earlier this month to launch a campaign opposing Governor Andrew Cuomo's proposed state increase. They're vying for what they say are more reasonable alternatives, such as raising the minimum wage to $12 instead of $15. A neighborhood in the South Bronx is fighting to deglamorize gentrification. The Mott Haven Herald reports that residents of the South Bronx neighborhood are taking offense to a billboard posted by developers near 3rd Avenue, renaming Port Morris the Piano District. Residents say the poster dismisses and attempts to erase the neighborhood's cultural and historical identity. The massive billboard sits at a site where 2 luxury high-rises are set to be built. A few neighborhood artists responded to the structure by throwing an anti-development party where members of the neighborhood were able to come out and voice their concerns. They coined the hashtag #WhatPianoDistrict in order to raise awareness of the issue over social media. From Singtao Daily, Chinese artists are protesting Times Square's new ticketing and law enforcement tactics. Thanks to topless women and aggressive costume characters, the city has been forced to tighten its regulation of street workers in Times Square. 100 extra police officers have been dispatched to patrol the area since this summer. Chinese artists who have been working in the area for over a decade feel like they've become unintentional victims of this new wave of enforcement. Artists who used to work every day are now cutting their days short to avoid getting ticketed. Street Vendor Project recently organized a rally speaking out against the aggressive ticketing practices, and in response, the police department promised to hold workshops for artists to clarify regulations. And finally, teen artists are getting the opportunity to help paint a mural highlighting the importance of healthy eating. A public art group called Groundswell is partnering with neighborhood organizations to help educate students on the issue of food justice. Groundswell is looking for ideas from teens who attend one of the 5 schools located at the Franklin K. Lane campus in Cypress Hills. DNA Info reports that the 250-square-foot mural is part of an initiative that artists and organizers hope will help turn the tide against high rates of diet-related diseases, poverty, and unemployment in Cypress Hills. Those were just a few headlines from the city's ethnic and community media. Independent sources will be right back.
Thanks for staying tuned. Finally this week, our On the Shelf segment focuses on the children's book Sofi and the Magic Musical Mural. Zyphus LeBron spoke with the bilingual book's author, Raquel Ortiz, and illustrator Maria Dominguez to learn more about the mystical story.
Raquel, Maria, thank you very much for being in studio with us today.
Thank you for having us.
Okay, so let's just talk a little bit about the book. Why did you decide to create this book?
I was working on my dissertation, and I was studying how we look at identity through community murals. So I was there, and I was at the University of Salamanca. So this was a really long dissertation. So about 300 pages into it, I would force myself to sit down and write every day. But I couldn't force myself to write about the dissertation every day. So I was studying the mural, and I had looked at 3 of Maria's pieces. There was one in the Lower East Side, one in El Barrio, and then this one in the Bronx. And this piece in specific, it was huge. It was 90 feet tall, long, 20 feet tall, and it had this huge vejigante in it. So I'm sitting there struggling with the piece in my daughter's room that I used as my office, and I thought, like, how would a little girl feel about this really big piece that's there and staring at her? And it's pretty scary with the horns and this mask and everything. And then since I had been working with Maria and also studying Maria as part of this dissertation process, I kind of played with the idea of a little Maria and how this would all be. And she had shared with me that she wasn't allowed to go out a lot, that she was staying at home and drawing and making art. So I thought, well, if you look out the window and you see this huge thing, like, how would you feel and what would you do? So I started playing with that idea, and then I had to study all the murals very carefully. And at the very bottom of the mural, there's some pleneros, which is the native music for Puerto Rico. And when you look at them, one has his hand out kind of playfully. And I thought, wow, what if she would go into that mural? So then that started happening, and instead of writing the dissertation, I'm having this musical, magical event with Sofi there. So she's in San Juan in this party with these pleneros in Viejo San Juan, and we were stuck. So then I looked at the beautiful mural, and there's all these different pieces of Puerto Rico in the mural. So I thought, well, we need Sofi to run around Puerto Rico. How can we do this? So the Vejigante has these yellow ruffles that are like wings. So I figured, well, what about if we have someone flying? Right. So in this story, the Vejigante comes to the little girl and spins her around and around, and then she turns into the Vejigante, and then she has some wings. So that was one part of it. And then recently I was sharing this book with some teachers, and I was talking about, oh, so she's scared and she has this fear, and then she turns into something else, and then she can fly. And it hit me, that was me with my dissertation. I was scared, I had all these fears. So I've always shared this book saying, oh, this is, kind of Maria's story, or this is kind of Sophia, my daughter's story. But last week it hit me that, wow, when you have these fears, you're kind of stuck.
Right.
But until you embrace it, until you kind of become it on some level, then you can go forward, and then you can fly. So I think the story helped me fly with my dissertation, and now it's helping us fly because we're able to share this story with lots of people.
Right, a lot of mysticism involved here. So Maria, your work, you've got a lot of your work around the city, as Raquel just said. Why did you decide to do this mural with the Vejigante?
Well, this one and I think two others have the Vejigante. At the time, I was trying to make a statement about the Puerto Rican culture and make a stand with this mask. And in this one, I love the Vejigante. Is a mask and a tradition that we use in the festivals in Puerto Rico, and the colorfulness of this tall looming figure. Mm-hmm. And in this mural, that's the first thing you see once you come down Tremont and Prospect Avenue. You hit it. There's this huge mask. And it's beautiful, isn't it?
Right.
And they use it all in the Caribbean, too. Cuba, Santo Domingo.
Right.
I don't know if they use it in St. Lucia. But
no, it's not the same. It's a different sort of carnival. But the Vejigante itself, what is the significance in Puerto Rican culture? Because I know there's a combination of the African and Taino influence on the Vejigante.
What I'm told, it's also an influence of Europe, Spain. Some people say they confuse him with El San Apóstol, El Santiago de Apóstol, who comes also dressed and slaughters the dragon, Santiago de Apóstol. But when he goes into the islands, we use the coconut husk, we use paper mache to transform that same tradition from Europe.
Mm-hmm. So, Raquel, how important was it for you to have a child of color in your book?
I think there was no conversation in that. This mural is in the South Bronx. So as of right now, keep our fingers crossed, the South Bronx is a very Latino, especially Puerto Rican community. And while when you read the book, Sofi's Latina. She might be Puerto Rican, might not, but she has this kind of background with this figure. People have told her he's just a trickster. She's not terrified of it. I mean, it's 20 feet tall in her neighborhood, so it can't be a bad thing. But I thought I wanted a child that would be open to this experience, not that other children wouldn't be open, but this little girl goes into this space. When you read through the text, there's a part that the song isn't actually even Spanish or English. It's this toco, toco, toco thing. But then afterwards, it does come in Spanish. So I was playing a little bit with the fact that in the diaspora, we have all these different cultures going on because Sophie, she's very Bronx or diaspora, United States as you want her to be, but she's open and she starts dancing and she starts embracing it. And I think my children, my little one who's 8, he's very open because it's around, it's in the air, versus other children, they don't have that, which I think is very sad. And then they're a little bit more resistant. I go into schools now, and you can see it's so beautiful. Our kids in Brooklyn, they stand up and they want to dance. And I said, do you guys know plena? No, but they don't care. And, you know, they're moving with me.
And more also that we have grown up with this in our islands. We're not afraid of the gigante. It's a song that my mother used to hum while she used to sing or sing. I learned it from the beginning. And when the festivals came, you used to taunt Vejigante, you used to run from Vejigante, but it was in a game.
Right.
So it's not a scary figure. It's a figure you play with.
Right. One of the things I noticed when I was reading the book was that your paintings show like a very broad range of people of color. Was that important for you too?
Absolutely,
in
because in Puerto Rico specific, the book is centered around the Puerto Rican culture. We're not just one color. We come in all colors. We come from Spain. We come from Africa. We come from Taino Indians, and it reflects on us today. Even when you go to the island or even here, you don't know. I mean, you might be fair skin and yet you speak Spanish. You may be black and you still speak Spanish. We come from such a diverse background. So I needed to manifest that in my illustrations.
All right, absolutely. So just about the book itself now, is it available on bookstores, in bookstores rather? Where can folks get it?
We have it, La Casa Azul in Lexington on 103. She's wonderful. Much love to Aurora. Not only does she have it there, she invited me to one of the parties they had in the summer to present the book. So the book's definitely there. Of course, it's online. It's throughout Arte Publico. And the book is soon going to be in District 14 in Brooklyn. They're going to be doing a district-wide project on Sofi. She's going to be the mentor project for a 10-week unit on diversity and culture. So we are both really, really excited. So all kinds of little kids in Brooklyn are going to be able to, sing and dance. But the big focus is she enters in to different places. So all of the schools that are on board are going to pick other countries to enter into.
That's wonderful.
So she's this sliding door to this whole world. So our hope is that we have 15 other Sofi books, and we can go to St. Lucia.
A series.
And then do exactly.
You're always welcome in St. Lucia.
Also, it's on Amazon.com, so you could find Sofi on Amazon.
Well, ladies, thank you very much for being with us today, and best of luck to you in your future endeavors.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
That's our show this week. Thanks for staying tuned. Till next time, be independent-minded.